Howdy, 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 my name is Anachi Sasuke, and welcome back to Let's Read the SCP Foundation Wiki. First things first, I apologize for there not being an episode of Let's Read Homestuck yesterday. I meant to record it, but instead blacked out for 5 hours. From, exhaustion out of nowhere. Also got attacked by mosquitoes, but those two are probably not connected. Anyway, in this episode, and probably the next couple of episodes, we're going to be looking at the A9 Resurrection Report, which is a part of SCP-105. Or at least that's where it branched out from. So here we have Part 0 before Alpha 9, in which the past informs the present. We got I Quit by The Duckman, Snakes and Ladders by Zin, and Factorum by DJ Cactus, who I can't actually even look at, but who's DJ Cactus? Oh, I guess these just go to the people who actually wrote the things. So I guess that the Part 0 before Alpha 9 are just obviously being things people wrote. And also the Deadly Moose, Escobar. But there's also things by, the actual people in the Foundation. So let's start with I Quit. See how far we get into this in the time it takes me to still be able to breathe. You what? Seven stared, aghast. She was the first of them to speak, but not the only one. You can't do that! 8 blustered accusingly. He slammed his fist down on the table and then shook it off, having hit harder than he had planned. This is a job for life! Tell him, 6! 6 steepled his fingers and studied 12 over them. For anyone who cared to look, there was a remarkable similarity between the two men. While 12 was clearly the elder of the two, 6 didn't look that far behind. The angle of their noses, the tilt of their head, even the shape of the face, they could have been brothers. One would expect 6 to even have the same bald spot that 12 proudly bore, if anyone could get 6 to take off that damned cowboy hat. I'm not so sure, 6 replied to the worked up 8. To be sure, it's never been done before. No, it's never been done before, 12 agreed. Since the council began, every overseer has left feet first. Shot, stabbed, blown up, turned inside out, reduced to a mimetic concept that can never die. He nodded slightly to 9, who nodded back in recognition, and variously reduced to their component atoms. But this whole thing with Site-19 has me thinking. I'm an old man. If I die, I will die on my own terms, in my own bed, looking at a picture of my dear wife. He paused and glanced at his hands. 2 reached over and set her hand upon top of his. It's okay, Adam, we all miss her. I don't care for your excuses, 5 snapped. His finger prodded at the table like he was trying to point at a clause in a contract that didn't exist. The rules are very clear. Once you have taken the oath, once you have joined the council, you are in it for the long haul. If you wish to leave, then we will be glad to have someone remove you permanently. 5 missed the glance that was shared around the table at that, from 6 to 2 to 9 to 3. Clearly the glance said, someone is overreacting. He wouldn't have cared if he had noticed. Of course he was overreacting. Someone had to. Except I didn't take the oath, 12 replied very softly. I helped create the oath, but I never took it myself. The records will bear me out. 5 stared open-mouthed. He slumped back in his chair and shook his head. 7 took up the slack and stood up from her seat. Be that as it may, you do not get to quit. As one of the few remaining founders, I'm not, 12 began. You were here when it all began. Original council or not, you're the closest thing we have, and we need you here. We need the knowledge you hold, and we cannot risk you being out on your own where some other group might try and take you. Oh, don't worry, 12 interjected. I'm not stupid. I'll still have bodyguards. Like an ex-president, I'll still be protected. I've actually spent the last decade or so building myself a small town up in the mountains where I raised my boys. He carefully did not look at 6. It's filled with retired agents and not a few blissfully ignorant scientists. I'm being careful, I can't be anything but. He took a deep breath and let it out, eyes rising to find 6. I had children. I never saw them because of this job. Some of them grew up to be good people, not because of me. I have grandchildren I've only seen through pictures. I want to reconnect with my great-grandchildren. I want to bounce a baby on my knee in my dotage. I want to be able to see the new millennium on my own terms, not... I want to be able to sleep, not thinking about whether the decision I made that day... His voice trailed off and he returned his gaze to his hands. A voice normally silent spoke. It's simple enough. We vote. As is proper, yes. The gathered council nodded silently to the one in charge. All opposed to 12 retiring? Hands went up. 7, 5, 8, 9, 4. 8 looked expectantly at the others. His glare intensified when they clearly did not move. All in favor? 6 and 2 shot up like they were being fired out of a cannon, both eager to support their friend? 9's hand raised at a more sedate pace. 11 wobbled, then shook her head. She wouldn't support, but she wouldn't negate. 12 moved to raise his hand, but lowered it again at a glare from 1. Clearly his own vote would not count. 3 shook his head in negation. He had no dog in this fight. 10 was clearly deep in thought, but her hand rose as well. To the shock of all, 1's hand rose. 5 to 5, 8 said. Ties go to the opposing side. You stay. 12 sat there, his gaze locked on the table, as if all his broken dream were laid open there. Until someone coughed behind them. 12 didn't move, just watched the eyes around the table both lit up, in the case of his supporters, and squinted almost shut in the case of his detractors. He didn't need to turn around to know who would be there with his hand raised. Adam, 12 no more, jumped up from his chair. He spun around to grasp the hand of the tall, lanky man behind him, and pumped it vigorously. Thank you, thank you, thank you! You're welcome. 13 pried his hand away and held out a small box to the first ever retired overseer. I hope you don't mind, but I got you a watch. It sounds like the watch is probably going to kill him. Okay, so next up is snakes and ladders. She drew a butterfly in her poetry notebook, labeled it 408, and added in parentheses, someday. And we can't read Factorum, so I'll just skip past that one. A lot of people pass through Site 19. The most common movement is the daily rush from the lab station to experimental room to cafeteria, back to lab station, with a few detours to the restrooms. Then there are those who move from enlightened to exhausted. There are those who move from mundanity to madness. There are the others who pass through sterile rooms in body bags and move no more. And then there are the movements that are not through halls, but through hierarchies. When researcher Zin Kiryu was first assigned to Site 19, her orientation included a tour of the biological anomaly containment cells and a quick meal in the ground floor cafeteria. She was then offered space in the on-site living quarters. She decided she could learn to ignore the pervasive emptiness of the halls and the faint mechanical buzzing present everywhere in the site. She'd get used to it because in the midst of the lesser anomaly she'd been shown, she'd seen something that remained in her memory long after the voice of the guide had faded out. SCP-408 would soon need a new assignment of Level 2 caretakers watching its feeding schedule. The tour guide had recalled that Zin liked butterflies, and wouldn't it be nice if she was on the roster for 408 after she got settled in and was ready for it? Watching a cluster of butterflies morph into a perfect replica of the silver pendant she wore, Zin told herself that one day, that Level 2 would be her, and wondered what ready meant. A week later, Zin moved in. She brought the usual necessities and a few personal possessions to stave off the unfamiliarity. A spider plant and a pot decorated with painted butterflies, a gift from her old school friends, a teddy bear wearing a little lab coat, her spare poetry journal. Flushed with the excitement of her first day as a live-in researcher, Zin immediately sought out the 408 roster and added her name to the list of hopefuls, hoping to work with the illusory butterflies. Later the same day, she received a very polite professional email informing her that she'd been taken off the list because she lacked the requisite experience, and please do not reapply at this time. Zin blinked at the email, then closed it and shut down her Foundation issue laptop. She picked up her lab coat teddy bear and put it on her head, concentrating on keeping it balanced. She then stared out her window, sulking for the next half hour. Lack of experience. Do not reapply. Not good enough. The next day found Zin tearing through the living quarters in a mad dash because she'd somehow she'd lost 3 pairs of socks she must have misplaced during the move-in. Someone who was napping earlier had pity and pointed her towards the lost and found. Said lost and found was a large cardboard box sitting in the quarter's main common room. Zin approached the box with caution, noting the stained sleeve of a lab coat trailing over one side, and wondered if she should have brought protective gloves. She didn't find any socks, but halfway through the box she unearthed a copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, wrapped in a plain paper cover so as to seem utterly unremarkable. She opened to the first page, where 3 names were written neatly next to the dates. The most recent owner had purchased it second-hand nearly 30 years ago. After some hesitation, Zin took the book. Reading The Art of War gave her a strange sort of comfort. She was new, unknown, effectively non-existent to everyone else on the site. With only a bachelor's and a few years of graduate-level lab work, she knew she wouldn't be turning heads anytime soon. The book provided advice and guidance no one else would give. Think of the reasons to not trust you. Eliminate those reasons. She needed allies to stand a chance here. Allies, not minions, because you want someone just as good as you watching your back. Someone who will claw for recognition just like you, plot and plan and covet just like you. Will consider your achievements a means towards their own ambitions. She made it this far relying on herself to keep promises, repay favors, gather friends. This was just a new piece of the sky to navigate, a new network of clouds and stars to build. She drew a butterfly in her poetry notebook, labeled it 408, and added in parentheses, someday. 2 weeks in, Zen endured her first failed experiment. Glassware cracked, sample rendered unusable, hours upon hours of worth of careful work lost in one careless mistake. Her co-workers barely spared her a second glance, just shrugged it off and let her mop up the sad remains of the biological anomaly slide. It wasn't that they disliked her, she decided as she tossed out the cleaning rag and her soiled gloves. They didn't even know enough about her to like or dislike. Only a few of her labmates remember her face, and even fewer bothered to learn her name. Why would someone be concerned about a nameless stranger's mistakes? When Zen slunk back into her quarters later, she ignored her notebook and glared at the sharks of the world calendar she'd affixed to the wall opposite her desk. Logic. She could drown out this bitter taste, and not good enough with logic. Facts. Hard truths. The short-finned mako shark is the fastest shark in existence. Highly intelligent, capable of leaping 9 meters into the air. What is the worst thing that could have happened? The unstable sample might have exploded, contaminating the entire lab and all the researchers present. What is the worst thing that could have happened? Everyone might have died. Did the worst thing happen? No, not even close. Then you pick up the pieces and salvage something from this. Zen crumpled a tissue, swiped at her eyes, opened up the Foundation internal messaging system, and read through the newest memos without really reading them. She remembered the indifferent looks of the other researchers in the lab. Allies, she reminded herself. You need allies. She saw a memo sent out 2 days ago mentioning 2 level 1 interns coming into the lab for the first time. No one else cares about these guys, she thought. They're distancing themselves in case the new meat makes mistakes. I can use this. I can't be the only newcomer to mess up. I can't be the only one to feel dejected, lonely, not good enough. I may be new and inexperienced, but I can still become a mentor, a colleague, a friend. Someone to share stories with. Someone who makes this place less empty, less cold. Zen composed a message to the new initiates. The next afternoon found Zen sitting alone at a table in the site's second-floor cafeteria. In between bites of sandwich, she was composing a sonnet about the inevitability of failure when someone, one of her supervisor's colleagues apparently, sat down in the seat across from her. I hear you're new to the labs, the guy said as he sat down at a lunch tray, opened a container of dressing, and proceeded to drown his salad in it. Zen blinked. Yes, she ventured, I am. Nice to meet you, Dr. The man told her his name and a lot of things she hadn't even asked for. Department, clearance level, and a half an hour of personal anecdotes. Zen hardly got a word in edgewise, but as she listened to the man describe the various insect toxins his lab encountered, she busied herself picking apart the monologues for cues. Shaking his head, eyebrows drawn, hand gripping coffee cup tightly when talking about recent data. I should make a sympathetic sound and avoid introducing the topic. Posture relaxed, more gestures, talk about some sort of experimental prototype. Make sure to bring that up if you ever see the guy again. When the guy finally stood and thanked her politely for the discussion, Kiryu, he called her, not Zen. Zen scratched out the 2 rhyming lines she composed and scribbled down everything she remembered from the encounter. Eventually, the notebook came to hold more people than poetry. Every time Zen learned something about someone, she wrote it down. It was a way to remember faces, names, life stories, when they next met, and they would come to remember her name, even if they only knew her as the person who remembered them. It took time, but it was an investment. Every person was someone to share lunch with, someone to swap gossip with, someone to vent to when lab work went awry. Moreover, they could also vouch for her, bring her closer to 408, give her an advantage over everyone else aiming to be 408's caretaker. Chance was something Zen never trusted. When it came to things she really wanted, she preferred to stack the deck in her favor. Somehow, Zen attracted the attention of a lab director. She was invited to research meetings. The supervisors discussed a lab transfer. She did the transfer paperwork herself. Show them your worth. Demonstrate responsibility and self-sufficiency. On her first day in the new lab, she entered the room ready to get to know the other lab technicians, hopeful and wondering when where the anomalous insect specimens were. But the lab techs exchanged sheepish looks and mumbled something about a miscommunication. They ushered her into the near ancient lab archives holding handwritten notes, case files, and other artifacts of research from decades ago. She was asked to retrieve a series of documents and maybe do something about the deplorable state of the stacks. Zen kept her expression carefully neutral, put away her lab gear, got to work pulling charts. When the door closed and she was left on her own, can't spare a second of their time for the new person? She sauntered over to a stray plastic cup sitting on a bookshelf, no doubt left by some slob who didn't pick up after themselves, scooped it up and calmly crushed it in her fist. It wasn't anger, she told herself. She was just making the trash more space efficient. For the next few days, Zin reported directly to the archives and made herself comfortable there, shuffling between the rows of accumulated research. Dust and solitude make decent company for strategy, she thought, while she tugged at the sheath of the diagnostic graphs jammed between two binders. The lab techs would be very much indebted to her when she fixed up the mess here, Zin told herself. Then she grit her teeth as a stray medical certificate grazed her hand, and she bandaged her third paper cut that week. Since no one who visited these archives ever talked much, Zin had plenty of space to think about how to turn the situation to her favor. She would do her assigned task well, better than well. She'd practice searching the shelves until navigating the stacks felt so natural that others envied her skill. Then she'd develop a system to make it that easy for everyone else. There will be no more to gain keeping her here, and no choice but to move her on. It took a week. The lab techs blinked at how simple it was to find documents now that she rearranged the previously outdated catalogs. They thanked her briefly and moved her onto the cold storage freezers. It was a step up, Zin told herself. She would handle the dead bugs first and push forward until they trusted her with the living. That night she opened her notebook and turned to the page with the butterfly. She drew another butterfly below it, wrote the date, and wrote one word: soon. Let your rapidity be that of the wind, your silence that of the forest. Zin was mentally reciting passages from Sun Tzu the day she met someone she immediately admired. She'd been rearranging preserved liver slices in the communal cold storage chambers, 7 years of backlogged specimens since that last big sample transfer and consolidation, when someone called out her name. Kiryu? Is that you? A man stepped between the stainless steel shelving units. He looked about her age, maybe a little older. It's good to finally meet you. Did you know people in the other biolabs call you the Freezer Fairy? She was getting a hell of a lot of mileage out of her practiced true neutral expression. But she was curious. I'm Zin. I don't know about the fairy part though. Last I checked, no magic wand, no sparkles, no wings. She made a show of looking over her shoulder as if checking. The man smirked. Researcher Kiryu, the one who flits between the shelves like a butterfly on the wind. He waved at a nearby shelf. Everything gets magically organized when you're around, though no one notices you actually moving things. Zin wondered if that comment was supposed to sound vaguely insulting. She also wondered why no one seemed to want to call her by her first name, but went with a smile anyway. Even if you disagree, don't challenge someone unless you need something from them. Guess that does sound like me. Stay focused on the immediate. Is there a specimen you're looking for? Yeah. Any chance you know where the three-headed sulfuric acid-spitting centipede and its siblings are? The man shifted his gaze to a collection of microscope slides, and Zin got a better look at them. Tall, sturdy-looking shoulders, and a rather garish streak of blue. I'll have to ask him about that sometimes, and his otherwise dark hair. Zin paused, racked her memory, and told him where he'd find the centipede in about 5 seconds. The man seemed impressed. Pretty impressive, Kiryu. He grinned and scratched the collar of his shirt, the motion revealing a small dragon-like design embroidered onto the sleeve of his lab coat. This guy does needlework? What will the lab techs do when you leave this place behind? When Zin offered the man a hesitant chuckle, maybe he'd like to get lunch sometime? He folded his arms, hiding the embroidery. Is he embarrassed by it? And shrugged. I'm joking. But there's been talk in the labs about having you train some of the others. Your system works more than well enough to adopt. Higher-ups like your ideas. This person is privy to conversations that I'm not supposed to hear, was what Zin heard. She nodded, and this time her smile was genuine. If the system works, I'd be happy to teach others to use it. Thanks for the heads up, researcher Mercer. Riven Mercer. I work in the lab 2 doors down. That was a lab 148's feeding rotation list. Nice to meet you, Researcher Mercer. Maybe we'll run into each other again sometime. We're definitely running into each other again sometime. Zin didn't write his name down. She wouldn't remember it without the notebook. 3 days later, Zin was given a team of bright-eyed, super excited lab interns. Over the next few weeks, she taught them how to navigate the labyrinthine cold storage rooms, setting each intern in charge of a section of the organisms and organs locked in frozen sleep. She taught them how to talk to the supervisors, coaxed them to take pride in their responsibility, to be the experts that others would ask for help, to carve out their own prestige. The Division of Labor gave her time to return to the labs, handling samples instead of just putting them on the right shelves. It was still a far cry from working behind the locked doors marked SCP-, but Zin still had her interns, her reputation as the Freezer Fairy, and a notebook full of favors waiting to be called in. Would it be enough? She remembered Mercer's carefree smirk and the centipedes. The freezer team settled into a daily routine. Zin would meet with the interns twice a day in the morning and evening. The time in between was spent patrolling the cold storage. Sometimes they'd all exchange terrible science puns they'd heard in grad school. The guy in charge of the human anatomy section always got the most groans. The day the shyest intern told her that he looked forward to the team lunches, Zin hummed upbeat pop tunes for the rest of the shift. Things were comfortable. Then, one day after lunch, Zin entered the cold storage vault and heard a scream. Following the noise, Zin rushed through the racks of stinging, piercing, biting specimens and stiffened when she saw one of her interns sprawled against a shelf, clutching an arm and breathing raggedly. On the ground, scuttling towards through shards of broken specimen kits, was a vividly striped magenta scorpion. Cold storage suddenly seemed warm compared to the ice in her veins. Not on my watch, fucker. Zin grabbed the only thing she could reach, a stapler. Maneuvering herself towards the gasping intern, Zin clenched her hands until they steadied. In a split second, she saw the pinchers click and the stinger sway. Zin lashed out in sheer reflex. The toe of her right shoe met carapace and the scorpion was flung against a steel cabinet. It fell and flopped onto its back and Zin stomped on it, swiveling her foot as she crouched down to put her full weight onto the thing once, twice, 3 times. Lady. When she saw the still form twitch, she brought down the stapler's pointy edge in terrified reaction, at the sound of her intern fighting for breath, drowning out the last noises made by the clawed menace as it went limp. Zin breathed out and collapsed against the wall, shaking, scorpion guts smeared on her gloves. That's why we wear closed-toed shoes in the lab, she said. She wouldn't remember much of the next hour. Her interns later told her she'd seem catatonic as she silently transferred the scorpion's near dismembered remains into a reinforced plastic container, and the biohazard team arrived to clear up the mess. Zin later endured a long and demeaning lecture from her supervisor about the crucial specimen she destroyed, her carelessness when it came to emergencies, and her disregard for proper procedure. She should have let security handle it, left the intern to fend for herself. Untrained personnel shouldn't engage. Better to lose 1 than 2. The callousness of the higher-up left Zin seething quietly for weeks. Apparently, the simple medical kit tucked away at the front entrances of cold stores were supposed to be more than sufficient. Besides, the interns had been trained in emergency procedures, a 2-hour seminar months ago, and a breach that threatened the life of only one person was a low-priority situation. That night, Zin tossed the Art of War book back into the lost and found box. It was obvious that the freezer interns couldn't count on immediate backup for anything less than a dinosaur breaking out. Zin decided that her team would never again be left in the lurch with only some bandages and disinfectant. She didn't want a medkit in every section, she wanted a specialized chemical kit on every shelf, unique to the type of anomaly stored nearby, whether poisonous arthropod, noxious reptile, or rabid mammal. The specialized kits would take months to design, approve, and process, and even longer to put together. Zin knew that if she worked on a side project, she wouldn't be able to compete for a 408 slot. To hell with it, she thought. Her pitch was met with enough enthusiasm to get her interns kicked out of the cafeteria. The next day, Zin began drafting her proposal. The report was 20 pages long and cost her several nights of sleep, but when the first prototype, Arthropod series, Zin noted with a grin, was handed to her by an amused-looking Riven Mercer himself, she felt like she was finally getting somewhere. Within a year, the kits had been implemented in every lab at the site. By that time, Zin had transferred to Riven's lab to begin advanced lab experimentation. Unfortunately, Mercer had gone on to work in anomalous object processing, promoted before I could catch up, and the 408 roster had been changed. Her new lab wasn't on the list. A few months passed. The days turned into routine, an endless blur of tests, samples, analysis. Researcher Kiryu? Someone Zin didn't know was standing behind her. Someone she was immediately suspicious of since she was currently in the biological anomaly lab, holding a syringe filled with a caustic substance, and the man didn't seem to care about startling her. Yes, sir? Zin capped the syringe and placed it to the side. The motion had become familiar after months upon months of practice. Being interrupted in the middle of an experiment wasn't. I've seen your group's work. Your former interns are doing an excellent job. The man was hard to place. He was a doctor, that was all she could be certain of. She couldn't recall ever seeing him, meaning he had to fall on one of the extremes. Newest of the new, or... Zin suppressed a twitch. I'm glad to hear the interns are doing well, sir, she ventured carefully. The man ignored her pleasantries. You're moving up to my lab. Check your memos, move your belongings, find someone to watch your ducklings. Oh, and bring protective gear. I'm going to dissect brains today. I expect you in place in 1 hour, freshly scrubbed. He didn't tell her they would be dissecting the brain of a deceased reality bender. When she exited the lab hours later, visibly shaken, Zin reviewed what she'd learned. Dr. Everett Mann was a no-nonsense man. He was meticulous in his procedures, terrifyingly adept with a scalpel, and her new supervisor. The next day saw her analyzing the brain slices under a microscope. Successive weeks led to the generation of pages upon pages of complex diagrams, sketches, figures. With so much data came the possibility of manipulation. Practical manipulation, Mann promised, and the engineering of new anomalies nigh fully understood. Further time spent with Dr. Mann revealed an almost worrisome fascination with the esoteric structures of the once anomalous cadavers, verging on mania. Though some of his beliefs were rather unorthodox, he held to them fiercely with a self-assuredness Zen envied. When man was in these excited phases, usually pacing around in a lab coat splattered with the evidence of successive dissections, Zen listened rapidly to his theories and scribbled out pages and pages of notes. 6 months into her 2 lodge, Zen was granted her first pet project. "Kiryu, I want you to take what you've learned and make something," Man said. "Give it a form and give it a will to obey. You will be assigned 10 lab assistants, and you have authority to make requests for materials which will be approved or denied as I see fit." That night, Zen tore out the notebook page with the butterflies and taped it to the wall next to the calendar. Without hesitation, she crossed out the 408. A few years passed. During that time, Zen ended up discussing her pet project with almost everyone she met. It started out as small talk when people asked what she was up to in the labs, but the excitement in the replies came as a shock to her. People from all sorts of departments offered to help out, and to Zen's surprise, turned aside her insistence on repaying the debts. Raw materials, level 2 full-time researcher, anatomy and physiology department, the guy who remembers the day of the week based on the color of his pen in his lab pocket, enthusiastic, my favorite intern from the old team. "Researcher Kiryu, it's been forever! I got promoted just like you thought. Remember you called me the Viceroy of Viscera because I was in charge of the organs and storage? I miss you big time, yeah. You and your dumb bug jokes. Come on in, we just got a new bender brain." "A framework? Level 3 senior researcher? Biomed engineering department. The lady with the painted nails. Easygoing. I like listening to her talk about the latest site news." "Oh, hey, Ryu. Good to see you again. You should visit. I'm pretty sure there's a deceased 408 sample sitting around in my lab somewhere. More than enough for a cell swatch. Thanks so much for teaching my BME texture system, by the way. The archives and freezers haven't been so neat in decades." "Power? I need some way to keep this thing alive and living." Level 4 lab director jumps between 3 departments. The older woman who likes the soft cloths used to clean eyeglasses. Stately. I looked up to her when I first met her. "The crystals bend the light, see? You can work the wavelengths into whatever pattern you like. Test them out, Kiryu. That kid of yours saved 2 of my fingers last week." "Will? How do I make this thing process, learn, adapt, obey?" Level 4 lab director, research and development. The gentleman whose projects are all ongoing has yet to bear workable results, who ended up using his own cells for his experiments. Meditative. He understood how I felt when everything was stagnating. "Here, my research notes, an old man's rambles. Make the most of them, Miss Kiryu, and thank you for listening." Bit by bit, department by department, the pieces of the puzzle were mapped out, assembled, and put together. When Zen held her first complete, whole, unblemished magnus opus, a painted lady butterfly shimmering with wavelengths of light arranged in the patterns of reality bender cortical columns, and infused with her own cells, her own DNA. As she watched the luminescent wings open and close as the butterfly regarded her serenely, faces and names passed through her mind as she remembered the collaboration that had brought her to this point. She felt worthwhile, meaningful, ready. "Hello," she said. The butterfly tilted its antenna and slowly, steadily brought its front legs together. With each contact tab a syllable of sound. "Hello, Zen." Ah. Okay, so she made an SCP after years of wanting to work with 408. She gave up and made her own SCP. Ha. And like I said, I can't read Factorum, but there is no telling how long Incident 0 is. Let's see what Part 1 is. Because even though this is a short episode, if yeah, okay, so I want to have this episode just be Part 0, and the next episode will be Incident 0, and then from there, Part 1, which will probably take at least 2 episodes for Part 1. And then there will be Part 2, which will be another 2 episodes, and then Part 2.5. And then all this shit, which will take who knows how long. So, this has been Anachi Sasuke. This was episode 26 of Let's Read the SCP Foundation Wiki. And I will see you guys in the next one. Later.